But times are changing. Africa is no longer playing by those old rules. Burkina Faso is not waiting for approval from distant capitals or scraps left over from global negotiations. By forging a direct alliance with Brazil, a powerhouse of the global south, it is reshaping the map of global commerce, daring the world to keep up. This is not merely a business deal, it is a challenge to the established order. It is a declaration that Africa is ready to claim its place at the table, not as a junior partner, but as an equal. This deal is about far more than crops. It is about power, who holds it, who loses it, and who has the courage to seize it. The agreement stands as a blueprint for South-South cooperation, a model of what can happen when nations of the global South choose partnership over patronage. It is a declaration. Africa will no longer be a pawn in someone else's game. This is the transformation of dependency into leadership, turning Western outrage into undeniable evidence of progress. Western capitals are reeling. Across the vast plains of America, soybean farmers, once the kingmakers of the crop, are furious. Their market share, long taken for granted, is now slipping through their fingers like sand. It is not just about lost business, it is about lost power. Generations of control threatened by an alliance forged thousands of miles away. For decades, the United States wielded agriculture like a weapon, setting prices, controlling supply, and binding continents to cycles of dependency. The American Midwest became the breadbasket of the world. At the height of its influence, the U.S. Department of Agriculture could dictate terms that stretched from the fields of Illinois to the markets of Lagos. What if a small African nation shattered Western dominance with a single signature? Pause for a moment and truly consider that question. Imagine the ripple effect. The world's most powerful economies, nations accustomed to steering global trade, suddenly thrown off balance by a move from a place they once overlooked. This is not a fanciful scenario or a distant dream. It is happening right now, under our very eyes. Burkina Faso, a landlocked country in West Africa, often overshadowed in international affairs, has finalized a soybean agreement with Brazil worth $25 billion. In one bold move, these two nations have cracked the foundation of global trade, sending shockwaves far beyond their own borders, right into the heart of Western boardrooms and government offices. The stakes could not be higher. If Africa falters, it risks being dragged back into the shadows of dependency, the familiar territory of lost chances and broken promises. If the West cannot adopt, it faces the loss of billions, a shrinking sphere of influence, and the crumbling of its agricultural supremacy. This is more than an economic contest. It is a struggle over the future of global leadership itself. A new order is rising, one in which dignity and partnership are not empty slogans, but living realities. The aftershocks of this deal will be felt everywhere, from the glass towers of New York and the historic streets of Paris to remote villages across the African savanna. The symbolism is powerful. A partnership between two former colonies, once exploited and controlled, now turning the tables on their former masters. But how did a single deal trigger such global upheaval? To understand why the world is in turmoil, we must uncover the hidden history of agricultural power and why soybeans have always been far more than just a crop. Let us journey back, tracing the arc of influence that made soybeans both a blessing and a burden. To understand this seismic shift, we need to look back at the roots of global agriculture, at how soybeans became a lever of global control. The story stretches back more than half a century. After the Second World War, as the United States emerged as the world's economic colossus, it looked for ways to extend its influence beyond its own borders. Food became one of its most potent tools. Soybeans, with their versatility and nutritional value, became a staple not only in American diets, but in feeding livestock and fueling global food chains. But in the hands of the United States and its Western allies, soybeans became more than sustenance. They became silent weapons wielded by the powerful. America and its European partners set prices, managed supply, and turned food into a tool of coercion. The infamous Food for Peace program of the 1950s and 60s, for example, was not just about charity. It was about tying countries to American exports, creating dependencies that would last generations. When a nation dared to resist Western terms, it could find itself shut out of essential markets, denied access to vital seeds and fertilizers, or thrust into economic isolation that choked futures before they began. Aid was never a gift. Each sack of seed, every shipment of fertilizer, arrived with invisible strings. Development projects reflected not the needs of African farmers, but the ambitions of distant executives and diplomats. African governments were pressed to accept policies that funneled profits abroad, emphasizing exports over food security and leaving local prosperity sacrificed for someone else's gain. The stories are many. In Zambia, for example, farmers were encouraged to grow cash crops for export, only to find food prices at home soaring beyond reach. In Ghana, foreign aid projects built roads to ports, but not to local markets, making it easier to send goods out than to feed local communities. Multinational companies, shielded by Western governments, held sway over every stage of the process. They selected which crops entered African soil. They demanded that farmers purchase new seeds every season, erasing centuries of traditional seed saving. Intellectual property laws, drafted in Brussels or Washington, left smallholders defenseless and deeply dependent. The result was a cycle of debt and dependency. Choices stripped away, voices drowned in boardrooms oceans apart. The story of Monsanto's patented seeds in India is a warning. Millions of small farmers fell into debt, and some tragically took their own lives when they could not keep up with payments. No continent felt this grip more than Africa. To join the lucrative soybean trade, African nations were often forced to buy genetically modified seeds from foreign corporations. These seeds came wrapped in legal contracts with harsh conditions. Farmers could not save seeds, had to buy new ones each season, and pay royalties on intellectual property they barely understood. The West dictated the rules: what could be planted, how it must be grown, and, most importantly, who would profit. The infamous structural adjustment programs of the 1980s and 90s, imposed by the International Monetary Fund and World Bank, often required African countries to open their markets, privatize state farms, and prioritize exports over local food security. The winners? Western corporations and investors. The losers? African farmers and families. The stakes could not be higher. To remain trapped in these exploitative systems is to guarantee perpetual poverty for millions of families. Africa's vast potential stays locked, its people forced to import food that their own soil could yield. It means never steering their own fate, always waiting, always dependent, forever told what is possible and what is not. The answer begins with a single, unprecedented deal, one that would shake the foundations of global agriculture. In the dust and sunlight, a partnership was forged that promised to rewrite the rules for everyone. A single thunderclap echoes across two continents, Burkina Faso and Brazil, signaling a shift that will leave no corner of the world untouched. This was never just Africa's burden. Across the global south, in Latin America, in the rice paddies of Southeast Asia, in the vast fields of Ukraine, similar chains were forged. Natural wealth flowed outward, while poverty and instability settled in. In Argentina and Brazil, vast tracts of land were turned over to soybean monocultures, often at the expense of forests and local food crops. In Indonesia, palm oil and soy replaced rainforests, enriching a few but leaving millions landless. For the West, it meant unending profit and unchecked power. For millions in the South, it meant futures stolen before they could unfold. But no empire lasts forever. The machinery of Western dominance is faltering. The rise of China as a global agricultural player in the 21st century is instructive. By investing in local production, building infrastructure, and forging South-South partnerships, China changed the rules of the game. Now, under the relentless sun of Burkina Faso, a new revolution stirs, with Brazil arriving as a crucial ally. Something has changed. The old order is cracking. The question is, What sparked this upheaval, and how did Burkina Faso set the world ablaze? For decades, Burkina Faso was dismissed as a powerless bystander, a small nation at the mercy of Western capitals. Now it stands shoulder to shoulder with Brazil, one of the largest agricultural producers on the planet. Brazil's transformation over the past 30 years is legendary. From a food importing country to an agrarian giant, it leveraged technology, credit, and land reform. The Cerrado region, once dismissed as unproductive, was turned into a breadbasket with the help of Embrapa, Brazil's agricultural research company. Today, Brazil rivals the United States as the world's largest soybean exporter. Together, Burkina Faso and Brazil have architected a soybean agreement worth $25 billion. Not as charity, not as dependency, but as equals in every sense. This is South-South cooperation, stripped of illusion or interference. There are no Western middlemen, no dictated prices, no hidden strings pulled from distant boardrooms. Instead, two nations shaped by colonial legacies are forging a partnership built on mutual respect. They are trading value for value, dignity for dignity, and together, they are tearing up the old rulebook of global commerce. Across the heartland of America, Iowa farmers watch the news with disbelief. Their silos are packed with unsold beans, once destined for easy markets. Their machinery, built on generations of confidence, now sits idle. For years, the United States ruled the soybean trade, using its power to shape economies and politics alike. But the old monopoly is unraveling, and the tremors are being felt far beyond the fields. In 1973, for example, President Nixon's administration banned soybean exports to Japan and the Soviet Union, using food as leverage. The world remembers. In Washington, officials scramble for answers. In Brussels, panic takes hold. In Paris and New York, the mood darkens as analysts finally admit what they have long feared. The old system is crumbling. The West faces a cascade of consequences. Billions in lost revenue, shrinking influence, and the potential collapse of an agricultural dominance that has endured for more than half a century. The stock prices of agribusiness giants like Cargill and Archer Daniels Midland tremble as new competitors emerge from the global south. Yet for Africa, and for the entire global south, the stakes are even higher. This is a once-in-a-generation chance to seize real economic power, to set the terms rather than obey them. The meaning of this deal goes far beyond soybeans. It is proof that the global south can chart its own future, that Africa can emerge as not just a participant in world trade, but a leader. The symbolism is potent. A continent once divided and weakened by colonialism, now uniting to create wealth on its own terms. If Burkina Faso and Brazil can shatter the old order, who might be next? This is not merely a transaction. It is the spark of a movement that could upend the entire global order. In the 1950s, the Bandung Conference saw Asian and African nations gather to declare their independence from colonial masters. Today's alliance feels like a modern echo of that moment, nations standing together, refusing to be pawns. But as excitement surges in Ouagadougou and Brasilia, not everyone is celebrating. In shadowy corners, resistance is already taking shape. Western governments have a long history of pushing back when their interests are threatened. From economic sanctions against Cuba and Iran to the covert undermining of OPEC in the 1970s, history is full of countermoves. Will Africa's revolution face the same headwinds? If Burkina Faso can seize this chance, why not Mali, Nigeria, or all 54 African nations? Imagine an African Union that negotiates as a single bloc, setting terms for resource exchange, demanding investments in infrastructure and technology rather than accepting crumbs. This deal is a thunderclap of hope, felt not just in presidential palaces, but in the dust and bustle of villages. Imagine roads stretching where once there were only dirt paths, fresh water flowing from new wells, clinics where illness once spread unchecked, schools with books, teachers, and ambition, all funded by the soil's bounty. Farmers, once at the mercy of distant markets and ruthless middlemen, now find their voices and their power growing. Their harvests no longer mean mere survival, but the first taste of independence. The dominoes are trembling. From Dakar to Addis Ababa, leaders and citizens alike are glued to the outcome. If Burkina Faso can break the old chains, what stops anyone else? This moment is not just a headline. It is a signal flare, a blueprint for South-South cooperation, where African nations refuse to compete for scraps and instead trade as equals with Brazil, India, and others. Picture a continent where raw harvests are processed on home soil, where profits feed African families and dreams, not foreign vaults. But those who once ruled these markets are not stepping aside. Western governments, still hungry for control, will strike back. Sanctions, economic blockades, and a storm of propaganda. Their newsrooms will warn of instability. Their diplomats will quietly predict disaster. During the Cold War, the United States used the threat of food aid withdrawal to keep allies in line. Similar tactics could resurface. Yet, for once, Africa holds the momentum and the mathematics. Billions once drained as profit for outsiders could now seed new industries, create jobs, and ignite an era of growth for the many, not the privileged few.
Still, revolution cannot remain a distant ideal. It must be forged into real, everyday change. How can this promise touch the lives of millions who need it most?
Eyes across the world are fixed on Africa. In Beijing, Delhi, and Moscow, leaders sense a seismic shift, a new era where Africa is not a pawn, but a partner. The global balance is tilting. The rise of BRICS, the economic bloc formed by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is another sign that the world is moving toward multipolarity. Now, the question is not just how the West will react, but whether Africa can finish what Burkina Faso began. Will ancient fears of division, of dependency, of foreign sabotage rise up again? Or will this be the spark that calls a continent to unity and self-determination? The stakes are colossal. If this movement falters, Africa risks sliding back into familiar traps, dependency, lost wealth, and broken hopes. But if the dominoes keep falling, the world could witness a renaissance, a remaking of the global economy led from Africa's heart. Imagine a future where African companies, not just foreign investors, own the processing plants, the shipping lines, and the patents. Imagine a world where African leaders set the agenda at G20 summits, and young Africans innovate on a global stage.
A deal is not destiny unless we turn it into one. This historic soybean agreement is a beginning, not an end. For Africa, true transformation demands that bold promises become tangible progress, and that hope is hammered into real, lasting change.
To find the answer, we must look beyond deals and diplomacy and focus on how new wealth becomes new opportunity. What does true transformation look like on the ground? Let us draw lessons from history. When South Korea and Taiwan invested in education, infrastructure, and technology during their economic miracles, they lifted millions from poverty. When Rwanda invested in coffee cooperatives owned by local farmers, incomes rose and communities flourished. Africa must start by investing in itself. That means building silos to hold golden harvests, roads that link rural farms to bustling markets, processing plants that add value before export, and research hubs to birth the next wave of agricultural innovation. Without these foundations, today's promise will vanish like mist at sunrise. Agricultural innovation hubs could train a new generation of scientists, much like the Green Revolution did in India. Cooperatives, like those in Kenya's tea industry, could ensure profits remain local. Africa's greatest strength is unity. If nations bargain as a single bloc, their negotiating power multiplies beyond measure. The world cannot ignore a continent that speaks in one determined voice. This is how prices are set, terms are shaped, and interests are defended, by standing together, never apart. The European Union, negotiating as a single market, forced the world to take it seriously. Africa can do the same. But the old powers will not yield quietly. Western governments and corporations may retaliate with tariffs, sanctions,
or a flood of misinformation. At the same time, internal complacency, the illusion that victory is already won, could strangle this revolution before it truly begins. Vigilance is not optional. It is the price of survival. The story of Venezuela's oil industry shows the risks. Without transparency, investment, and unity, gains can be lost to corruption and division. Yet infrastructure is only part of the answer. The heart of transformation lies with local farmers and entrepreneurs. Wealth from these landmark deals must stay rooted in African soil. Training programs, fair financing, and local ownership need to be the new minimum. When Africans lead, the continent flourishes. If not, history repeats, and foreign interests walk away with the lion's share. Microfinance initiatives, such as those pioneered by the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh, could empower rural women to launch agribusinesses. Farmer field schools, like those in Uganda, can spread knowledge peer-to-peer. So, what does the soybean revolution teach us? That dignity, self-reliance, and the courage to dream big are Africa's path to lasting respect. The world honors those who shape their own destiny. When we refuse to bow, when we construct our future on our terms, we do more than rewrite our story, we change the world's narrative as well. But the true test lies ahead. Can Africa turn a single bold deal into a sweeping transformation? The world is watching, and the next move belongs to us. Every generation faces a defining moment. This could be Africa's. Will it echo the era when Ghana and Nigeria led the charge for independence? Or will it fade like so many missed opportunities before? If Africa fails to act, this rare chance will slip away, and the old chains of dependency will snap back stronger than ever. But if we seize this moment, if we invest, unite, and hold fast to our dignity, Africa will not only secure its own future, but also inspire the entire global South to rise and claim its place. Think of the Green Belt movement in Kenya, which combined environmental restoration with women's empowerment, or the African Continental Free Trade Area, which, if fully realized, could create the largest single market in the world. History belongs to the bold. In this pivotal hour, Africa stands at the threshold of transformation. Will you watch from the margins or help shape the revolution? The $25 billion soybean pact between Burkina Faso and Brazil is more than an agreement. It is a proclamation. Africa will no longer kneel, nor beg to define its own future. This is not a mere trade. It is a thunderous refusal to accept the limits others have set for an entire continent. For generations, African nations have been told to settle for scraps, to play small on the world stage. That script is being torn apart. Today, the world has witnessed what becomes possible when courage eclipses hesitation and when unity replaces dependency. The rise of the global South is no longer a distant promise. It is a living reality. Burkina Faso has revealed the blueprint, turning old chains into the tools of liberation and reshaping what is possible. This deal is not just for politicians or tycoons. It is a signal to every African leader, every entrepreneur, every young visionary. Will you let others decide your fate, or will you seize this opening, magnify its effects, and ensure Africa rises, not just in agriculture, but in every sphere of global influence? The stakes stretch across generations. To hesitate now is to forfeit Africa's autonomy for decades. To act boldly is to seize history itself for your family, your community, your nation. The world is watching. Old powers are anxious, but Africa's hour has come, and history will not pause for the timid. Reject the chains of small ambition. Demand partnerships rooted in dignity and mutual respect. Envision what could follow this moment, not only for Burkina Faso, but for every nation daring enough to write its own story. Rise, speak, and let the world know Africa's future will not be dictated. It will be forged side by side by those courageous enough to lead. And so, as the dust settles on this historic agreement, the true work begins. Let this be the first domino in a cascade of transformation. Let every African farmer, every student, every policymaker see this deal as proof that change is not only possible, but within reach. Let us chart a course where Africa's resources fuel its own dreams, where its people are not just witnesses to history, but its authors. The world has heard Africa's voice, clear, confident, and unafraid. Now, let it see Africa's actions, bold and united, forging a future worthy of its boundless promise.